The Russian Association for Healthy Children presents Physical Immobility, Civilization Ailment. June 1st, 1970 saw the launch of the Soyuz 9 spaceship. The first manned space mission had taken place more than 9 years before. Cosmonauts Andrian Nikolaev and Vitaly Sevastyanov spent 18 days in orbit, the longest mission by that time. But more than anything else, it is its unexpected aftermath that has earned it a place in the history of space exploration and international medicine. Soon after landing, the health of the cosmonauts suddenly deteriorated. Their lives were in jeopardy.
Выполнили с Андрианом полет с 1 по 19 июня.
When Andrian and I returned to Earth after that mission, we were in for a surprise. When I was helped out of the craft, I couldn't stand at all, no matter how hard I tried. We could take the first steps unassisted only a week later. Very strict medical criteria were always applied in selecting would-be cosmonauts. Special care was taken to train them physically and psychologically, with large margin of safety. Why then did well-trained cosmonauts Nikolaev and Sevastyanov find themselves on the verge of death? What happened when they were in orbit? An ailing child brings misfortune to the whole family. Members of the family are all the more unfortunate when this ailment is considered incurable and the child is likely to be disabled for the rest of his or her life. Infantile cerebral paralysis sounds like a prison sentence. This footage shows the same children after treatment. Their movements are more coordinated, they have better control of their bodies. How can people with seemingly incurable diseases be helped? Children are supposed to have special predilection for physical activity. However, according to data cited in wide-ranging international surveys conducted in 34 countries, most children today prefer to lie on the sofa watching TV and sit in front of a computer for hours on end in place of outdoor games. Such children do not want to move about. Researchers have dubbed them vegetable children. Why do these children lose their innate need for physical activity? What causes so-called vegetable lifestyles? The old Russian fortress called Oreshik is more widely known as the dreadful political prison of Shiselberg. Nikolai Morozov, member of the Narodnaya Volya and revolutionary, spent 20 years here after being put behind bars in 1884. Unlike most other inmates, he survived. Later, he became a leading scientist. How did he manage to keep himself fit to live an active life until the age of 92? This is one of the last photographs of Dr. Fyodor Uglov, a unique person and famous surgeon. On this picture, the generally acclaimed patriarch of surgery is nearly 103 years old. He practiced surgery until the age of 99. An incredible fact. Sometimes he spent 5 hours at the operating table. He wrote books and was a well-known public figure. He championed sober lifestyles. He was head of the Alliance for People's Sobriety since its founding. How did he manage to maintain his capacity for work until that venerable age? Leading Russian scientists note that the country's population of children has been showing a stable trend towards deterioration. Healthy people account for only 3 to 5% of the school graduates despite of various rehabilitation programs. The state of school children's health in Russia today is an issue causing concern. The ideal situation would be as follows. Children's health is not undermined during their stay at school. Rather, their health is improved. 6 academies with government status made a special point of discussing a whole range of issues relating to educational and health at a session that took place in 2006. All delegates agreed that children's school environment and their life activity resulting from the process of education undermine their health in a very significant way. Children in critical health conditions who have just acquired the ability to walk, and 2 well-trained cosmonauts who could take the first steps only a week after landing. What do they have in common? Why are today's children afflicted with disease at a much younger age than before as their viability fades away? On the other hand, there are people who have gone through imprisonment, hardship, wars, people who work hard throughout their lives. They maintain their capacity for work until a very old age. In a film that follows, we will attempt to answer those questions and show who has solved the problem and how. Motion is a universal law of the universe. Movement is characteristic of the planets and the solar systems. There is motion in all vegetation and animals. Everything around us is in a state of motion, from atoms and cells to cosmic worlds. Physical activity is a necessary precondition of human life. Vita et vir. As ancient Romans used to say, there is no life without motion. Movement is life's most important function. No living creature can exist without physical activity.
Природа придумала так, что человек там
Nature has decreed children and young people to move around and play outdoors in order to enter maturity as healthy people.
Войдя в зрелый возраст, что называется, был здоровым.
For scores of thousands of years, people's vital functions depended on their muscles. The muscle played a key role on whether people moved about or made a product. The muscle was always at work. In the 20th century, machines all but ousted the muscle from production. People no longer needed them in the process of movement in space. Humankind became firmly tied up with the chair, the sofa, and the armchair. The chair has become a symbol of civilization today. Homo erectus has been transformed into individuals spending most of their time sitting around. How did it come about? People can assume three main positions in space: recumbent position, sitting position, and standing position. The horizontal, recumbent, position is intended for long rest. The sitting position is good for short rest. People's biological setup is not designed for long periods of sitting. They are supposed to sit for a short while at a time. The corporal vertical means the body's vertical position, that is, people standing and walking upright. This position supports the active part of man's vital functions. It was a dominant position for at least scores of thousands of years. The corporal vertical is man's specific feature, man being a biological species. This position makes for the best functioning of all the body's systems and organs. Educating people, above all means, forming dynamic, locomotor, and psychological stereotypes or, to put it simply, habits. As the saying goes, if you sow a habit, you will reap a character. If you sow a character, you will reap a destiny.
Формирование привычки, которая диктуется семьей,
A habit formed primarily in the family turns into a lifestyle. This should result in a long and happy life of good quality.
радостным, счастливым, будет долго жить с хорошим качеством.
Let us see how motor stereotype habit is formed and how it affects people's lives. What is the prime factor in this case? It is a way of life. From the standpoint of the body's position in space, people's way of life depends on the environment. It compels the body to assume various positions. Prams and chairs put constraints on children's natural physical activity from early childhood. Later, they sit watching TV and play games in a sitting position. They sit throughout the 11 or 12 years while attending classes at school and go on to college or university where they spend most of their time in a sitting position. Many graduates take up jobs which constrain their movements. Today, people find themselves in an environment which is adapted to people who spend most of their time in a sitting position. To be more exact, the environment molds them. It shapes a stable motor stereotype, that is, a habit compelling people to stay in a sitting position. The workplace of an adult or a child leaves them with no other option than sitting.
Более того, Если ребенок изначально
Indeed, if the child does not initially see an erect man, he can never properly stand vertically on his legs. Only a Kipling story tells about a child growing up among animals and walking and running like a normal human being. But numerous instances of real children point to the opposite. A child will never stand on his feet unless he has the image of a human walking upright in his mind's eye. In what position do our children see us? Yes, mostly in a sedentary position. If they develop in the image and likeness of adults, they too will spend most of the time sitting. That is the law of people's development. Let us see how much time our children spend sitting. According to the Russian Academy of Education, each day primary school students spend up to 70% of their time in a state of relative immobility. The corresponding figure for high school students amounts to 90%. We have asked the country's leading medical experts to tell us how sedentary lifestyles today, especially those of children, relate to the growing incidence of disease and the fact that now disease affects people at a much younger age than before.
И когда я смотрю на школьников, на молодежь,
I feel sad looking at school children and recalling the time when I was as young as they are now. The mortality rate among young people between the ages of 20 and 25 in this country has gone up 82% in the last 15 years. What is the root cause of this situation, as it can be traced to school and adolescence?
в школе, они лежат в подростковом возрасте.
Надо сказать, что наша молодежь
Young people here
к зрелому
approach maturity
возрасту
with
уже
very
сильно,
poor
так
health.
скажем, измененной с точки зрения состояния здоровья.
Поэтому проблема легочного здоровья, она кричащая проблема сама по себе.
Physiologically speaking, the position of children sitting behind their desks impedes oxygen exchange and blood circulation in the body.
Обмена кислородом в организме человека не физиологично и по кровообращению.
Так вот, простатиты – это заболевание, которое мы раньше считали.
There was a time when we thought prostate disease was only characteristic of old people. Today we find teenage prostate disease. Yes, it affects teenagers, to say nothing of men aged 25 to 30.
30 лет. Я говорю о подростках.
Частота распространенности этих заболеваний в популяции.
The incidence of disease affecting reproductive organs in boys is very high. Today, 1 in 3 boys is in danger of his capacity for reproduction being undermined.
По формированию нарушений способности к воспроизводству.
In the past 40 years, the incidence of disease in some organs of the reproductive system of boys has gone up nearly 30 times. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has cut the standards concerning the quality of male semen by more than 7 times.
Поэтому столько много.
That is the reason for the large number of impotent and sterile men. Male sterility now accounts for 56% of female sterility.
Вот к чему приводит.
That's what boys get when they lack physical activity. It has been scientifically proven that if a boy is to develop as a man should, it is vital that he has thrice or 5 times as much physical activity as a girl. And indeed, boys are fidgety. Their very nature dictates to them to be more agile. But what about girls? How do they develop as would-be mothers?
Костный таз. Да, это очень важный орган для женщины, потому что через него проходит ребенок.
The pelvis is a very important organ for a woman because a baby goes through it at birth. Today, pelvises have become contracted, or to put it scientifically, they have become justo-minor due to inadequate physical activity. They appear to be undeveloped since childhood. Changed pelvis shapes are a prevailing tendency. In this sense, an adult woman is like a child. There is a growing rate of pathologic labor and cesarean sections.
Поэтому частота кесаревых сечений больше.
Самая большая проблема человечества на сегодняшний момент – это все-таки остеохондроз, то есть заболевание.
The biggest problem facing mankind today is osteochondrosis, an ailment of the spinal cord and joints. It is rooted in childhood. The disease stems from childhood to manifest itself in adult life. We have shown these photographs to scores of specialists. Each of them said the child's posture might trigger diseases typical of their specialty.
Когда мы говорим о том, что ребенок в школе
We like to say that school children in class are reminiscent of animals in a zoo or parrots in a cage. Come to think of it, there are some parallels there. It's not very ethical to say that, but really, an active child should not be tied up. Such children need physical activity in principle.
Ребенка, который в принципе не может не двигаться.
But what about animals in captivity? A horse must not be kept in a horse box all the time. Even the more comfortable conditions of upkeep that have been created for horses today don't mean that they need less physical exertion. A horse lives as long as it has exercise. Daily training is a must in the formation of a horse. Being able to develop in an environment of uncurbed physical activity is a crucial aspect of a natural environment. Zoos aim to replicate this environment for the animals.
Я открою вам одну тайну. Наши кошки долгожители.
Our cats live long because they exercise a lot.
Постоянно.
They are in motion all the time. There is a tree for all the cats to climb. They don't sit still unless they are taking part in a performance. They run and jump in their pens. Aides take them out of the pens and bring them to that tree. They make sure the cats climb 15 to 20 times. The cats are stimulated in that way. Life depends on physical activity.
Движение – это жизнь.
Restrictions imposed on freedom of movement in prison have often cost lives. Nikolai Alexandrovich Morozov is an interesting case in point. This man endured 20 years in prison. He was brought here from his prison cell in the Petropavlovskaya fortress. He was brought here to die. He couldn't walk. He had the scurvy and nascent TB. His legs were swollen because he was suffering from dropsy. He realized that he must have exercise, so he decided to walk about the cell to cover at least 10 kilometers at a time. He wouldn't sit down before covering that distance. He couldn't afford indulgence. And that was his salvation. Nikolai Morozov spent a total of 29 years in the jails of Tsarist Russia. But let's get back to the cosmonauts. What was so special about the 18-day space flight by Andrian Nikolaev and Vitaly Sevastyanov?
Эффект пребывания в невесомости был настолько...
The time they spent in weightlessness produced such a critical effect on the state of their health that international agencies decided that a man could not stay in outer space for not more than 17 days.
В течение которого человек может находиться в космическом полете.
This means that medical experts working with the cosmonauts had no idea that their flight would have such serious hazards for their lives. But it seems that manned flight could not go on. But a way out was found, and a very simple one, too.
Оказалось, что надо просто...
As it turned out, it was necessary to increase cosmonauts' physical activity to make up for the lack of exercise. First of all, this means a treadmill and a bicycle ergometer.
Это занятие с велоэргометром.
The robustness of the human organism and the universality of its life support mechanisms are simply amazing. It has been established that if the musculoskeletal system is stressed for 2 hours daily, this will enable the cosmonauts to stay in space for more than a year. This index underlies a system protecting cosmonauts from the ruinous aftermath of hypodynamia in weightlessness. Manned flights have been given a new lease on life. Studies in outer space have provided a wealth of material enabling us to understand what goes on in the human body without much exertion. The idea of stressing the musculoskeletal system and using footing with the body in a vertical position has been successfully applied to the treatment of infantile cerebral paralysis, post-surgical rehabilitation, and people doomed to immobility. But let's get back to school. Look at this picture. A child sitting with a book in his hands is seen as the embodiment of the diligent pupil. We are happy to know that he is learning something. but in fact, he is succumbing to disease.
И как
Once
только
people
человек
lose
начинает
muscles,
терять мышцы, он
they
начинает
begin
приобретать болезнь.
gaining disease.
А урок
Запускает нашу вертикальную позу. Вот это опора, опорные реакции.
Supporting mechanisms and reactions trigger our vertical posture. These mechanisms set in motion all muscles responsible for posture. If an individual sits still all the time, if your child doesn't get enough activity exercising supports, he'll get a stooping back with misshapen spinal cord, scoliosis, and the like. All that results from a situation where muscles are responsible for posture are idle. As it happens, we understand the importance of physical activity for animals in captivity, cosmonauts requiring life support, patients during a course of treatment, and even prison inmates. On the other hand, educational establishments only pay lip service to the need for exercise, but the process of education does not imply even a bare minimum of physical activity necessary for the healthy development of children. No matter how often we hear calls for more physical activity, they are nothing but good intentions.
Проблема в том, что те рекомендации, которые
The problem is that existing recommendations are not complied with. We talk about the need for our children to be healthy and agile in general terms, but we must create corresponding conditions for
Мы
them.
должны детям создать соответствующие условия.
How is it possible to ensure greater physical activity where an environment that has taken centuries to shape up leaves no place for it? 30 years ago, Dr. Bazarny formulated new principles of work with children in the process of education. The program includes scores of simple technologies and technical methods, making it possible to organize lessons in a way matching the child's nature. Let us consider one of these methods boosting the pupil's physical activity in class. Walking and standing upright are the key factors that have formed humans as biological species. The correct bearing is a crucial criterion of a healthy individual. Bearing and vertical posture play a prime role in the realization of people's genetic programs.
Как только нет
As soon as we lose the reaction of support, and as long as a system inherent in us as verticalized animals remains idle, we lose the vertical. When we are in sitting position, we don't reproduce the vertical. This is especially dangerous in childhood.
Особенно опасно это в детском возрасте.
How is it possible to restore corporal vertical to a child and make it a matter of habit? It has been suggested that the workplace of students should be modified in a cardinal way by replacing their sedentary regime with a regimen of alternating postures with the help of old-fashioned bureaus. At a time of total immobility, the bureau is seen as an exotic artifact. However, only a century ago, it was an inalienable attribute of any author or reader. Bureaus were used as workplaces by Peter I, Lomonosov, Pushkin, Dostoevsky, Dobrolubov, Nekrasov, Chernyshevsky, Mendeleev, Lenin, and thousands of their counterparts around the world. This approach is based on a curriculum taking account of the corporal vertical, something that is in line with the child's natural agility. Classes are based on alternating dynamic postures. Pupils spend some of their time sitting behind desks and then some standing by writing desks. This kind of regimen stimulates the child's concentration, capacity for work, and motivation to study. It develops resistance to environmental factors and creates conditions for the child's harmonious development. Alternating postures is obviously the natural and right thing to do for the pupil. When we put 3 bureaus in the classroom, children would scramble around for the right to use them. They would come in an hour early to be the first to take up position by the bureau. They like it so much that they are eager to work there during the whole lesson.
Это вид школьной мебели, естественно, позволяет работать детям в положении стоя.
The bureau enables children to work standing. Alternating dynamic postures are a good hygienic factor, preventing static fatigue.
Гигиенический фактор профилактики статического переутомления.
This educational procedure has proven to be the simplest and most effective method of the child's development. The treadmill and the cosmonaut spacesuit, with vertical load, have taken manned flights out of deadlock, enabled man to stay in outer space for a long time. By the same token, the Bureau and related technologies of education have suggested to society a way out of another impasse of modern civilization: lack of physical exercise. 30 years of studies have established that using bureaus in school and at home increase the child's viability by 2 to 3 times, increases physical activity in class by 5 to 8 times, decreases manifestations of neurological frustrations and various forms of aggression in children by 5 to 6 times, decreases disease incidence among school children and the incidence of disorders affecting their musculoskeletal, cardiovascular, and reproductive systems, gastrointestinal tract, neurological sphere, and other systems by 2 to 4 times. 60% of children in classes using traditional methods, where children sit behind desks, succumb to hypnosis, something that is not characteristic of children and teenagers using bureaus for their studies. Such children resist other people's willful pressure. They have no psychological dependency. A workplace consisting of a table and a chair is an ingrained stereotype fueled by manufacturers of furniture. Habits die hard. Therefore, there is only a handful of people using a bureau in their work. And yet there are such people. I think and write more clearly when I use a bureau in my work. This helps me alleviate the spinal cord and keep my legs in tonus. Now a few words about children. As they grow up, they need exercise. But in a classroom, they have to sit behind their desks for a tedious 45 minutes, and then they suffer very much because of that. Obviously, they need a different kind of physical training lessons. They need to exert themselves more. They need to get used to working with a bureau, especially when they are just starting school, to avoid disorders of the spinal cord and bearing. School is a ship in a sea of knowledge. It is a nice image, but alas, it has little to do with reality. Rather, it is a spaceship without a life support system that would guard the cosmonauts against the ruinous effects of hypodynamia. The mechanisms ruining the human body are the same in space and on Earth. The difference is that in outer space it takes days to feel the effects, but on Earth it takes years, as long as children attend school.
Поэтому, если вы хотите здоровья, если вы хотите прожить...
If you want to be healthy and remain active throughout your life for the sake of your family, society, and yourself, don't forget that physical activity is the basis of life. The more you are physically active, the better your life is. Consequently, you live a long and healthy life. That's what all of us want to achieve. And that's what I wish to your children.
Приоритетом образования должно стать
The priority in education should be not only computing, not only food, not only to improve medical care. The most important priority is the organization of the educational process in accordance with the natural laws of child development. Our children's physical activity is the key to their healthy life in the future. It is sometimes said that school is a springboard for adult life. But be sure not to tarry up for too long. It's time to get up.